A turtleneck is always great for colder months on its own or for layering. And you have to love a free pattern. This is the Crimson Turtleneck from Mood Society. We're sewing two versions of this turtleneck in today's sew-along. A fold-over neckband and a hacked mock neck with a necktie. For all of my seams and hems, I'm using a triple straight stitch. It was the only stitch that allowed great stretch for this beautiful royal blue jersey I'm using today. Sew this cold weather wardrobe staple with me. Let's get started. Before I place my front and back pieces right sides together and pin the shoulder seams, I'm going to apply knit stay tape to both shoulder seams for the front and back pieces. And I'll fuse them in place. This will prevent the fabric at the shoulders from overstretching over time. I'll link this knit stay tape in the description. Now I'll place my front and back pieces right sides together, and I'll pin the shoulder seams and the side seams. I'm going to sew my shoulder seams and side seams with a 1/2 inch seam allowance and press the seams open. You can also finish both sides of the seam allowances if your fabric frays. For the bottom of the garment, I'm going to fold the raw edge to the wrong side by about 3/4 of an inch all the way around. Now with our hem pre-pressed in place, we can sew this hem using your preferred stretch stitch. I'm going to sew close to the raw edge on the inside just using a triple straight stitch. And I'm going to be sewing it from the outside of the material, just feeling underneath to feel where the edge of my fabric is. Fold your sleeves in half right sides together and pin the underarm seams. Sew with a 1/2 inch seam allowance and press the seams open. For each of my sleeve bottoms, I've gone ahead and pressed the allowance up to the wrong side by 3/4 of an inch, and I'll edge stitch in place with a stretch stitch just as I did for the bottom hem of the garment. I'll turn my sleeve right side out and place it into the bodice, which is wrong side out. Double check to make sure you're attaching the correct sleeve to the correct armhole. Then pin in place all the way around, aligning the underarm seams. Sew the sleeve to the armhole with a 1/2 inch seam allowance and repeat for your other sleeve. For the standard turtleneck, fold your piece in half, aligning the shorter edges. Right sides together. Sew this short seam with a 1/2 inch seam allowance and press the seam open. Once that's sewn, fold the piece in half, wrong sides together, aligning the raw edges. And mark your quarter points along the bottom edge. I've also marked the quarter points along the neckline. Now I'll place the collar and the neckline right sides together and pin in place at the quarter points. You can choose to place the seam of the neckband at the center back or at one of the shoulder seams. I'm placing mine at the center back. Now sew the neckband to the neckline with a 1/2 inch seam allowance all the way around. Now the turtleneck with the standard fold-over collar is complete. If you'd like to sew the mock neck version with the built-in necktie, cut a long piece of silky satiny material measuring 25 inches by 3 inches. Fold that material wrong sides together and pin all the way around. I'm going to sew the long edge and both short edges with about a 1/4 inch seam allowance. I'm going to leave about a 1 inch gap in the middle of the long edge for turning. Turn your tie right side out and give it a good press. Then use your sewing machine or a needle and thread to sew that opening shut. For this mock neck tie version, I've cut my collar to be half the height of the original pattern piece. Along the lower edge of this collar piece, we're going to be sewing 8 buttonholes. I'm going to evenly space these 8 buttonholes apart from each other, making sure not to include the seam allowances in these measurements. Once I've created those markings, I'm going to apply knit interfacing on top of those buttonhole markings, cutting small pieces of knit interfacing to be about a 1/2 inch wide and about 1 1/4 inches long. And I'll fuse these interfacings over each buttonhole marking, fusing them a 1/2 inch from the bottom raw edge. Fold your collar piece in half right sides together. Sew your side short seam with a 1/2 inch seam allowance and press it open. Then we'll fold the collar piece wrong sides together. Aligning those bottom raw edges, we're going to sew each of our 8 buttonholes through both layers, making sure that you're sewing through your interfacing for each buttonhole. I'm going to start my buttonhole stitching 3/4 of an inch away from the raw edge. My buttonholes are going to be about 3/4 inches long. Placing small pieces of tissue paper can help you form smoother buttonholes through knit fabric. Mark the quarter points along the bottom raw edges of the neckband. As well as marking the quarter points along your neckline. Place the neckband and the neckline right sides together and pin in place at the quarter points. Sew the collar in place with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Now you can lace your tie through the neckband starting on one side of the center front back and forth to the other side of the center front. Now the turtleneck with the necktie is complete. Thank you for watching this sew along. Make sure you subscribe to the channel so you don't miss future sewing tutorials, and I'll see you in the next video.